Accountability. What's it like to deal with somebody who doesn't hold themselves accountable for their own actions? For someone who holds themselves accountable, I speak personally that it's not easy for me because at first glance, most times I see something greater in that person. And then when you figure out that that's not what they do, they will throw you under the bus. They will make you look like the enemy just to keep their own image, to uphold their own image in the midst of people who don't see any difference or any wrong in that person. It could drive you to anger. And I would say that I've dealt with more women than men who didn't hold themselves accountable, and I dated most of these women. When you, even in private, when you have a conversation with this person, it's like they don't even know, they're not even aware that, they're not even aware of how they sound. Even if you go through a scenario and you say, okay, so you did this, right? Let's give a bigger example, and I'm gonna try to stay on track. I have a habit of leaning off subject. So once upon a time, I was incarcerated. I had committed a crime. It was an assault charge, and I had to go to court, of course, and then I ended up having to go to anger management classes. So you had to be evaluated first before you went to these classes. You couldn't just join the class, and I understand after going through the process, I understand why. So I go to anger management class, and they introduced themselves and we're talking and stuff, and it was like, so why are you here? I said, because so-and-so pissed me off. That's why I'm here. And they said, so the person in question asked you to assault them. I said, I'm looking at them like, are y'all serious? Like, of course they didn't ask me to do that. They just was, they pissed me off with the actions that they did. And maybe later on, and I'll be comfortable enough to talk with a whole bunch of strangers about it. But talk with strangers in detail about what happened. And so as we talked, and they said, okay, so they broke it down, and they was like, okay, so why are you here? I said, like I told you, I said, because so-and-so pissed me off. They did this, and, I did what I did. So in that moment, I was feeling justified for my actions because the other person did some foul stuff. And they kept talking. So they said, do you think that anytime you could have found a different way to handle the situation? I said, yeah, I probably could have walked off, but I didn't. And they said, why? I said, because they made me angry. And they was like, who made you angry? I was like, them. So you mean to tell me they held a gun to your head, and it's not verbatim, they held a gun to your head and forced you to be angry, and then they asked you to assault them? I said, man, where is this going? This is some of the stupidest stuff I've ever heard somebody say. But within the 30 minutes or whatever that conversation, they was helping me to understand that I was the reason that I was sitting in front of them. I was the reason that I went to jail. I was the reason that I have to do probation. I was the reason that I got to pay out all this money in order to stay free. And it was that simple right then and there. I was taught how to be accountable for my actions. And I could say I did something. To this day, it's like, yeah, I did that. I wasn't the father I needed to be. I wasn't the friend that I needed to be. I wasn't the husband I needed to be. It showed me how to really look at myself and say, this is your fault. Look in the mirror and say, this is your fault. This is why things are the way they are. Because of you. Because of what you chose to do or what you chose not to do. Now, you can't get out here and please everybody. You know, I don't recommend that you try to do that. I don't recommend that you stress yourself out about it or lose any sleep. But whatever you do and don't do that causes harm or regret or whatever cause somebody else to feel some kind of way, own up to that and say you did it. Say you did it. You know, I would say we are fortunate to deal with people like this because we're able to understand that maybe we might not want to be their friends. Maybe we need to separate ourselves from them. Maybe we need not to socialize with them that often. Because sometimes stuff rub off. And we don't believe that. But it does. And then next thing you know, it's like they say, when you lay down with dogs, you get fleas. Birds of a feather flock together. All of that good stuff. And you don't want to be associated with certain people, man. You don't. And then when these people are close to you, it's harder to break away from them because they looking at you all these years to be on their side. Man, I've been the same person for years, man. That's the problem. You've been the same person for years, and you don't want to change, and you don't want to be anybody different. That's why you're going to always have these issues within yourself, because you never took the time out to listen to anybody that told you something that was good for you. Somebody's telling you, hey, you know, girls used to say, oh man, you got a smart mouth. And I'd be like, yeah, I heard that before. But I didn't realize how bad it was until after I ended up married. And the children would always say this and say that. Now, my children were different, though. I guess it didn't bother them like that. But with my stepkids, it was like, Mama, he said this, and Mama, he said that. It's almost like I never took what they said serious. I felt like they was kind of, you know, I addressed them like they was whiny, you know, sometimes, and a little spoiled, which they were. We talk about it. Or we talked about it. And I had to look like, man, come on, man, go back to what you was learning, you know, hold yourself accountable. This is who you are. Well, sometimes it takes for people to really be analytical about who you are and point out some things about you for you to notice that this is who you are. And that was like a real big revelation for me because I never saw myself in that light. I never saw myself like that. Never saw myself, and I was just like, man, you got to go back and look at how I was interacting with people. Like, oh yeah, that was me. I was, you know, played a lot and was goofing off with people and, you know, a lot of jokes and stuff. Wasn't too immature. Mature late. And I'm fortunate that I left home when I did, because I probably wouldn't have been who I am now. I probably wouldn't have grown into the person I am now, because I would always have my mom to lean on. But at the same time, I feel like maybe it would have been different, because I have recently, within the past 2 years, since my dad passed away, gotten in touch with a lot of the elders on my dad's side, and well, actually my mom too, and have conversations with them and just talk to them about stuff. And it's like they're always well, you got to think about this and think about that and be like this, and they're uplifting. They give an uplifting word, and at the same time, they're holding me accountable for the things that I should do or shouldn't do based on the conversation we're having. They're being very honest with me, and who knows? I feel like I'm better off having left home a long time ago, because I was forced to depend on myself when I had nobody else. That's a whole nother story too. But dealing with people who don't hold themselves accountable can be rough. It can be a rough thing, because you can see where they're wrong, but then the people around them don't think that they're wrong, and they looking at you like you the enemy, like you the bad guy, because you're bringing, I guess, a new topic into the circle, and they never saw them like that. I've dealt with people dealing with people who are like that, and it's weird. It's just a weird thing. But I say that if you dealing with somebody who don't hold themselves accountable, I would say, look at yourself. You can't make them admit they're wrong, but you can look at yourself and say, am I like that? Do I do that? I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be that person. And you gotta strive to be an upstanding person regardless of how the world is moving. I don't want to be nothing less than that, to be honest with you. I'm not perfect, but when it comes to the majority of moral issues that we deal with on a regular basis, like how we talk to people, are we respectful? Do we hold ourselves accountable? Are we lying? Are we being straight up with people? Are we acting accordingly? Are we trying to be peaceful? Are we trying to deflect? Are we trying to what's the word they called it? Or are we trying to just be good people? And you know what good people are. Like Christian, but not like Christian, but maybe should be. When we move on that level, we can't let nobody stop us. We have to keep moving in that direction, because we know that this is going to be good for us and everybody around us. I got a homeboy right now, man. The dude's so cool, it's just crazy. Like, I could tell he had a lot of knowledge that he built up on his own, doing studying and stuff like that, the Bible and everything else. But he's not perfect. Having conversations with him, some of the stuff he said, I'd be like, wow, did he just say that? But I know that in a different setting, he wouldn't say that. Meaning that I think that's a good indication that somebody holds themselves accountable. When you cussing around your homies and your friends, but when you get around grandma or you get around people go to church and you don't curse, you're holding yourself accountable without even knowing it, because you're wrong. But then people will say, that's questionable. But if those people are going to find it offensive, you're holding yourself accountable by not doing it. And nobody has to correct you. Maybe it's an upbringing, or maybe you're just like, hey, it's rude to talk like that. Especially around people that don't talk like that. Accountability, to me, is one of the biggest traits, positive traits that a person can hold. Because that you can trust that person. For some strange reason, you could trust that person. You could say you feel like you could trust that person. And hey man, did you do this? Did you do that? Blah blah blah. And they say, yeah, I did that. But then holding yourself accountable can move across a broad landscape. It can move across a broad landscape. It could be like wow. Did you really think about that? So what I mean is this. So let's say you got a bad attitude right? You got a bad attitude, you angry all the time, and you're not, people look at you, you're not real sociable. So when you get in a situation and you're irritable and you snap out, yeah, I'm messed up sometimes, I'm this, I'm that. Yeah, it is my fault. Nobody made me angry. I just showed up to the party pissed off. I probably shouldn't have done that. Okay, cool. It was my fault. I apologize to everybody. That's somebody holding themselves accountable, right? That's one common way that somebody can hold themselves accountable, just by saying, yeah, I did that. And then also, you basically just, I guess you could say, owning up to your actions and stuff. I believe it can get complicated, but right now I'm brain kind of foggy, so I can't really think of anything that's really, because when I think of holding yourself accountable, I think of being honest, just being responsible. Being responsible to me is being accountable, because being accountable is a responsible thing. People could say, your child needs you to be there for them, but you're not paying no child support. Yeah, you're right. I don't pay child support. But I understand what can come from that if I don't. Not that you can't pay child support, you don't have a job. And also on the other side, a person that's holding themselves accountable is like, yeah, I pay child support and I have a job. I make sure that I keep a job so I can pay child support. I make sure that, I'm going to be there for my child. I'm going to, make sure that I'm going to be there for my child emotionally and in all the ways that my child need me to be there, right? So you could be honest, and then on top of that, you can be there for your child the way they want you to be there, the way you think you need to be there, but then you don't like to tell the truth, or you're a habitual liar. So you're not telling the truth in those days. You might be the perfect dad, but at the same time you're a womanizer. So it's a broad spectrum, though. I think so. I think that you could be a great dad and provide everything, be there for the child, and no matter what's going on with the child mentally, financially. And then it's like, when you're dealing with women, oh, well, why you gotta be like that? Why you gotta be? And then they flip the script and make it seem like it's the chick fault. So now you bailing out on her or whatever. It's ways. It's so many different ways to be held accountable. You might have a thing that you're just good at when it comes to holding yourself accountable. So, you ain't gonna lie to mama, but you'll lie to that broad, for real. You ain't gonna lie to your child, but you're allowed to get out of a ticket. That's sometimes we don't hit all the cylinders when it comes to being accountable. We touch where it's easy. We hold ourselves accountable where it's easy. You know what I'm saying? And we don't want to really dig deep into it, especially when the shit hit the fan. You're just like, oh man, I ain't think I was gonna have to admit to that. When you admit to that particular thing, now you got to go through this, and it's like, I don't want to go through that, but hey. That's where some people, it's easier for them to stand where it's not so heavy. So they ain't got to lift a load like that. You facing a year in jail, a couple years in jail, you ain't never been to jail, or you don't want to go to jail because you got a lot to lose. So some people might be subject to lie about the situation to keep from having to go to jail. But like I said, when it comes to mom, when it comes to the child, when it comes to, my person might be subject to lie to keep their job. So they'll hold themselves accountable when the burden is not so heavy. But when the burden gets heavy, then they're not ready to hold themselves accountable. So, like I said, it's like I look at things a little different. So it's kind of moved me to like, if you're not willing to do the crime, serve the time, don't do the crime. And that's how I feel about it. I hope you guys got something out of this. I done talked a little bit too long, and you guys be safe, be well, and try to improve yourself. You feel me? Peace.